Governor, with all due respect, your argument just collapsed under its own hypocrisy. For a heartbeat, the room forgets how to breathe. The air thickens. Every camera lens strains to capture what just happened, a quiet explosion of truth detonating in real time. Reporters freeze mid-scribble. The staffers behind the dais exchange nervous glances. Even Abbott, the man known for never flinching, blinks just once, but once is enough. Crockett doesn't smirk. She doesn't gloat. She simply lowers her gaze, the picture of composure, as if dismantling governors were part of her morning routine. The echo of her words hangs suspended, sharp, clean, undeniable. Collapsed under its own hypocrisy. Outside the chamber, the first notifications begin to buzz across phones. Inside, the silence grows louder. Abbott clears his throat, leans toward the mic, but no words come. His confidence has cracked like thin glass under a steady hand. Behind him, a staffer scrolls frantically, searching for a lifeline that isn't there. The moderator fumbles, trying to regain order, but it's too late. The story has already escaped the room. Somewhere, someone uploads the clip. The caption reads, "Jasmine Crockett ends the debate in 15 seconds flat." Abbott finally exhales, a tight, visible breath of disbelief. Crockett meets his eyes not in defiance, but in calm recognition, as if to say, "You knew this was coming." And in that quiet exchange, the power dynamic shifts. This isn't just a verbal takedown. It's a moment the kind history replays on loop, dissected in classrooms and comment threads, turned into memes and manifestos. Because what just happened wasn't about politics. It was about truth, spoken with the kind of clarity that cuts through every layer of noise. A whisper from the back row breaks the silence. She actually said it. And suddenly the room erupts, flashes, murmurs, disbelief, awe. If you blinked, you missed it. If you weren't watching, you're already behind. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't just win an argument, she reset the tone of the entire debate. But to understand why this moment mattered so much, you have to see how the debate spiraled into chaos in the first place. Rewind. Before the silence, before the cameras froze on Abbott's face, there was the sound of gavel taps and murmuring voices filling the state chamber in Austin. It was one of those sweltering Texas afternoons where even the air feels political. The agenda was clear. The governor's team was pushing a new reform bill, polished with patriotic language and packaged as progress. But underneath the marketing, critics whispered one word: discriminatory. The rows behind the panel filled with citizens clutching handmade signs. Some read, "Fair Texas for all." Others, "Not one step back." They came from every corner of the state: teachers, immigrants, veterans, students, each face carrying the weight of decisions being made by people who'd never lived their struggle. Abbott entered first, flanked by aides and cameras. His confidence radiated like a well-worn brand. The press called it Texas strongman energy, part swagger, part certainty that no one could challenge him and survive politically. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded, nodding as if the outcome were already written. For years, he'd ruled that way, unshaken, unbothered, untouchable. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett took her seat. She didn't come with an entourage. No handlers, no spectacle, just a folder of notes and a quiet intensity that didn't demand attention, it earned it. She greeted staff politely, smiled once, and began reading. A few reporters glanced her way, assuming she'd play the role of token opposition, respectful, procedural, easily ignored. They didn't yet know what was coming. As testimony began, the script unfolded predictably. Abbott's allies painted the bill as a necessary step to preserve integrity. His phrases were polished, repetitive, designed for headlines. But the audience shifted uncomfortably. Words like preserve and integrity carried a different weight for those who lived through policies that stripped them of both. A teacher stood to testify, voice trembling. "Governor, your reform means fewer voices like mine in these rooms." Abbott smiled faintly, the kind of smile that says, "I've heard this before." He thanked her and moved on. Behind him, his aides exchanged knowing looks. They'd seen this play before: outrage, protest, then silence. Abbott's machine was too powerful, too entrenched. But Crockett was listening not just to his words, but to the rhythm beneath them. She saw the pattern, the appeal to order, the coded reassurance to those already in power. And somewhere between his carefully rehearsed talking points, she caught the opening, a contradiction so small it hid in plain sight. As the session dragged on, Abbott grew more relaxed, gesturing expansively, reveling in applause from his base. Crockett's pen hovered above her notepad, motionless. She didn't interrupt. She didn't roll her eyes. She just waited, watching his confidence inflate like a balloon nearing its limit. The cameras caught the governor in full performance mode, the practiced pauses, the signature grin, the air of inevitability. And yet in the corner of the frame there was Crockett, silent, poised, unreadable. Outside the chamber, reporters were already drafting their headlines. Abbott dominates debate. Crockett silent on reform bill. None of them saw the spark in her eyes when Abbott repeated his key phrase, the one that would undo him later. This bill is about protecting the rights of real Texans. She underlined those words once, then twice. Because Crockett knew something Abbott didn't, that power built on exclusion eventually collapses under its own weight. Abbott thought it would be another easy day, until Jasmine Crockett took the mic. Greg Abbott's voice rolled through the chamber like a salesman's pitch wrapped in patriotism. He spoke in the language of absolutes, words polished until they gleamed. Freedom, security, protecting our values. Each syllable landed with practiced conviction, designed to stir pride and drown doubt. To his followers, it sounded like leadership. To his critics, it sounded like camouflage. He leaned forward, smiling tightly as he repeated the refrain. "We're safeguarding Texas from chaos." The crowd behind him nodded, many not realizing the irony that the chaos he spoke of was the lived reality of those already marginalized by his policies. Abbott was a master of performance. He'd learned early in his career that conviction could outshine logic if delivered with enough confidence. He didn't just argue, he commanded. His pauses were timed, his tone rising at the exact moments that made cameras linger. It wasn't debate, it was theater, and he'd been the star for years. As Crockett sat listening, Abbott unfolded his familiar playbook. He framed his proposals as moral necessities, always invoking the people, while erasing the very groups those people included. He would say, "We're standing for Texans," but never clarify which Texans counted. He would claim to defend freedom, but his version of freedom ended where his comfort began. Flashback to a previous press conference, Abbott smirking as a reporter questioned his immigration stance. "If you don't like our laws," he'd said, "there are plenty of other states." The room had laughed then. Not the good kind of laughter, the obedient kind, the kind that rises when people know they're supposed to agree. His power came from repetition. Repeat a half-truth long enough and it starts to sound like gospel. He'd used that rhythm for years: freedom from fear, protection from outsiders, pride in our heritage. Each phrase built a wall higher than the last until truth had no way through. Inside the chamber, Abbott interrupted opponents with polite condescension. "With all due respect," he'd begin, which usually meant, "I'm about to dismiss you." When a legislator brought up racial disparities, he countered with economic statistics cherry-picked for comfort. When someone invoked the Constitution, he invoked faith. Every move calculated, every word rehearsed. But what Abbott didn't notice was the fatigue in the faces around him. His certainty had begun to curdle into arrogance. Even his allies looked less inspired, more obligated. Political dominance had made him predictable. The strongman image that once drew admiration now cast a shadow, heavy, self-satisfied, and dangerously unaware. Crockett noticed everything: the rhythm of his delivery, the evasions cloaked in charm, the way he over-explained when he felt cornered. He was articulate, yes, but his eloquence carried no empathy. His logic looped back on itself, polished and empty, like a sermon stripped of spirit. He gestured to the audience, declaring, "This bill ensures every Texan's voice is heard." Yet Crockett knew, and the viewers at home would soon see, that the bill did the opposite. His every was conditional. His Texan was selective. His heard meant silent compliance. Another flashback: Abbott in a debate 2 years earlier cutting off a community activist mid-sentence. "You're entitled to your feelings," he'd said, smiling as security escorted the man out. That clip had gone viral for a day, then faded like every other controversy he'd weathered. His armor wasn't just power, it was repetition. He survived by making outrage seem ordinary. But complacency has a scent, and Crockett could smell it now, the faint arrogance of a man so used to winning he'd forgotten how to listen. He continued, pointing at the crowd for emphasis. "We stand for Texans who work hard, follow the law, and respect our traditions." His voice echoed through marble halls. Applause followed, though softer this time, uncertain. Crockett glanced down at her notes. 3 words were circled: freedom, security, values. The same words Abbott wielded like armor. But beneath each she had scribbled their human costs: families displaced, voters suppressed, voices silenced. As Abbott's speech crescendoed, his tone sharpened. The governor who once smiled now sneered, cornered by invisible dissent. He mistook volume for strength, forgetting that real power doesn't shout, it resonates. For years, Abbott's rhetoric had been his weapon and his shield, but on this day, both would fail him. Because while he was busy performing strength, Jasmine Crockett was preparing truth. And truth, when wielded with precision, cuts deeper than power ever could. But what Abbott didn't know was that his opponent across the table had come armed with receipts, precision, and a moral compass sharper than any attack he'd ever faced. Long before the bright lights and cameras of the Texas Capitol, Jasmine Crockett's world was South Dallas, a neighborhood stitched together by resilience, where Sunday mornings smelled like biscuits and asphalt, and where every porch carried a story about survival. Her mother worked double shifts. Her father fixed what was broken: appliances, cars, sometimes people's hope. It wasn't wealth that raised her, it was witness. Witness to struggle, to sacrifice, to the quiet courage of those who kept going when the system didn't. She learned early that power didn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it showed up in the form of a grandmother who refused to let the city ignore her flooded street. Sometimes it was a teacher who stayed after hours, tutoring kids by the dim light of a flickering bulb. These were the heroes who shaped her people, who didn't have microphones but spoke truth anyway. By the time she reached high school, Jasmine had a reputation. Sharp-tongued, steady-hearted, the kind of student who wouldn't let injustice slide, no matter how small. When a classmate was suspended for a rule no one could defend, she argued the case to the principal and won. Not because she shouted, but because she came armed with facts, fairness, and that same unwavering calm she'd later display in the Capitol. College was her launchpad, but law school was her battlefield. She didn't go to chase prestige, she went to learn how to fight the fights that scared everyone else. Civil rights law called to her, not because it was glamorous, but because it was necessary. While others dreamed of corner offices, she was taking pro bono cases, defending clients who couldn't afford to lose. She stood beside mothers evicted from their homes, teenagers facing charges that could shatter their futures, and elders whose voices had been ignored in the courtroom and at the ballot box. When she spoke in those courtrooms, the same tone that would one day silence Abbott was already there, calm, deliberate, unshakable. She didn't need to perform conviction, she was conviction. And every case, every verdict, etched a deeper understanding of what justice meant, not as a word, but as a duty. Her rise wasn't fueled by donors or dynasties. It was built on community fish fries, late-night town halls, and front porch conversations. When she first ran for office, pundits called her campaign symbolic. They said she didn't have the machine, but machines break, movements endure. She knocked on doors until her knuckles bruised, told her story until voices joined hers. "I'm not here to speak for the people," she'd say. "I'm here to speak with them." Those words became her signature: simple, defiant, human. And when she arrived in the state legislature, the chamber felt different. Her presence didn't demand attention, it commanded it. Not because she was loud, but because she was real. She carried her community with her, their faces, their fears, their faith in someone who finally looked and spoke like them. In interviews, she often downplayed her accomplishments. "I'm just a girl from Dallas who got tired of watching my neighbors lose," she'd say with a smile. But the humility only made her more magnetic. She wasn't there to climb ladders, she was there to break ceilings. Contrast that with Abbott, a man surrounded by handlers, rehearsed smiles, and perfectly crafted sound bites. Where he projected power, she radiated purpose. Where he courted applause, she sought accountability. His empire was built on control, hers on connection. Footage flashes across the mind's eye: Crockett at a protest, megaphone in hand, her voice carried by wind and conviction. "Justice isn't charity," she tells the crowd. "It's a debt this country still owes." The cheers rise, but she's not performing. She's reminding them and herself that the fight isn't about fame, it's about freedom. She's had doors slammed in her face. She's been called names Abbott's allies would never hear. But she wears those scars like medals, proof that progress always extracts a price. Her mentors taught her something Abbott never learned: that true strength isn't domination, it's endurance. And endurance has always been Jasmine Crockett's superpower. When the debate over Abbott's bill was scheduled, she didn't clear her calendar for spectacle. She came to do her job, to hold power accountable, to ask questions others were too afraid to ask. Her staff told her to prepare for hostility. She just smiled. "Hostility," she said, "means I'm hitting the right nerve." That morning she read through the bill again, every clause, every loophole. She spotted the language crafted to sound neutral but designed to discriminate. She marked it in red ink: one line after another, until her notes looked like a battlefield map. In the mirror before leaving her office, she adjusted her blazer, tied her hair back, and whispered the same words her mother used to say before every hard day. "Hold your ground. Grace is stronger than pride." She didn't know that by sundown, those words would echo across the nation. So when Abbott started his usual speech, Jasmine Crockett didn't just listen. She waited for the perfect moment to strike. The chamber lights glared with that unmistakable tension, the kind that hums in the air just before something unforgettable happens. Abbott leaned forward, his microphone catching every syllable of his well-rehearsed speech. He was in his element now, the showman before his audience, packing his phrases for effect. "Texans deserve leaders who protect their values," he said, his voice dripping with authority. "We will not bow to pressure from radicals who want to rewrite what it means to be free." Applause came from the usual corners of the room, polite and predictable. Crockett sat still. She didn't flinch, didn't glance around for validation. Her eyes remained fixed on him, steady, unblinking, the calm before the break in the storm. Abbott continued, his tone growing more theatrical. "We must preserve integrity, not bend to outrage. If we don't stand for our traditions, we lose the very soul of Texas." His hand struck the desk for emphasis. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the controlled aggression that had always defined his brand. Crockett slowly leaned toward her microphone. "Governor, may I ask a clarifying question?" Her voice was soft, almost disarming. Abbott didn't look at her, he waved his hand dismissively. "In due time, Representative, let's not get sidetracked." A flicker of annoyance rippled through the audience. Some shifted in their seats. Crockett waited a beat, then spoke again, just loud enough to cut through the noise. "It's just, if integrity is what you're defending, I'd like to understand which Texans get to define it." The room fell still. Abbott turned his head slightly, his practiced smile faltering for the briefest second. "All Texans," he replied smoothly. "Every citizen who believes in our state's founding principles." Crockett's eyebrow arched. "Even the ones your bill would silence." A murmur spread through the crowd, not outrage, not applause, just awareness. The sound of attention shifting. Abbott chuckled, a sound meant to convey control but carrying a tinge of unease. "Representative, I understand your passion, but you and I both know this bill isn't about silencing anyone. It's about protecting order." Crockett leaned back, her expression unreadable. "Order," she repeated, as though tasting the word. "That's an interesting way to describe selective power." The cameras caught the moment, the tightening of Abbott's jaw, the flicker of heat behind his eyes. He began to speak again, faster now, defensively. Be clear, this legislation ensures fairness for hardworking Texans who—" She interrupted him gently. "Governor, fairness doesn't need defending if it already exists." Silence again. Not the awkward kind, but the electric kind, the silence that fills a room when truth starts cracking through the veneer. Abbott's aides exchanged glances. He cleared his throat, regaining his performative rhythm. "With respect, Representative, your rhetoric might play well on social media, but the people of Texas know leadership when they see it." Crockett smiled faintly, not at the jab, but at the irony of it. "I agree," she said quietly. "They do." The audience caught the tension immediately, the understated defiance, the quiet power in her composure. Every word she spoke was measured, every pause intentional. Abbott was louder, but she was sharper. His arguments filled space, hers pierced it. He shifted in his chair, voice rising again. "We can't let political correctness dictate our policies." Crockett's tone stayed level. "Nor can we let prejudice masquerade as principle." There it was, the first real crack in his armor. The applause that followed wasn't explosive, just sincere. Even those who disagreed couldn't ignore the elegance of her restraint. Abbott's smirk vanished. The moderator, sensing the rising tension, tried to pivot. "Let's move forward to the next." But no one moved. The energy in the room was magnetic. The cameras panned between their faces, Abbott's forced smile, Crockett's quiet poise. It was a duel of presence, not power. For the first time all afternoon, Abbott's voice wavered. He shuffled his notes, searching for the next rehearsed line. Crockett didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence spoke for her, unyielding, unbothered, undeniable. The storm had arrived, invisible but undeniable, and everyone could feel it. And then, in a moment no one saw coming, she dismantled his entire argument in less than 15 seconds. Abbott's last sentence was still echoing when Crockett leaned forward, her hand hovering just above the microphone. Her voice entered the air not like a shout, but a scalpel calm, deliberate, precise. "Governor," she began, "you just said this bill protects the rights of real Texans. I want to understand what you mean by that." Abbott blinked. It was a simple question, but his silence betrayed what the cameras already sensed. He hadn't prepared for this kind of precision. He gave a faint smile, the kind that politicians use when they think they're still in control. "I mean Texans who work hard, who follow the law." She cut in gently. "So, not teachers who protest unfair policy, not veterans who disagree with your party line, not immigrants who pay taxes and send their kids to public schools." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Crockett's tone was steady, her words crisp. She didn't need volume, her calm made every syllable heavier. "Because," she continued, "if your version of a real Texan excludes the very people this state was built by, then your bill isn't about protection. It's about erasure." Abbott straightened, the familiar defensiveness creeping into his shoulders. "Representative, I think you're misinterpreting the intention." Crockett nodded slightly, cutting him off with grace. "Intentions don't change outcomes. If a law targets the powerless, it doesn't matter how poetic the introduction sounds." The room held its breath. Abbott reached for his notes, fumbling through them, trying to find the statistic he always used to reset the conversation. He started to speak again, but Crockett was already holding up a document. "Governor, these are your own words from last March," she said, reading evenly. "We must protect our communities from outsiders who don't respect our way of life. Do you stand by that?" Abbott hesitated. "I stand by protecting Texans." She looked up. "Then define outsider. Because to the people of Oak Cliff, South Dallas, El Paso, that line sounds a lot like them." Gasps whispered through the chamber. Reporters scribbled faster. Every camera light was now trained on her. She didn't look at them. Her eyes never left Abbott. "You talk about freedom," she said softly, "but you legislate fear. You talk about integrity, but your policies punish those who don't fit your picture of it. You talk about security, but what you really mean is silence." Abbott shifted again. The smirk was gone now. His jaw tightened. For the first time, he looked smaller than his title. Crockett leaned in just slightly. Her voice dropped to that low, unmistakable register of authority. "Governor, I grew up in a part of Texas that doesn't get televised, where parents work 3 jobs and still can't afford a voice in this room. So when I hear you use their struggles to justify policies that make their lives harder, I can't let that stand." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was seismic. Abbott's aides exchanged looks. He opened his mouth, but nothing coherent followed. His usual rhythm was gone. His script had collapsed under the weight of authenticity. Crockett didn't gloat. She simply continued, slow, surgical, and devastating. "You say this bill is about order," she said, "but order without justice is just control. You say it's about safety, but safe for who? Because safety for some and suffering for others isn't leadership. It's cowardice dressed up as policy." A ripple of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling, unstoppable. The moderator's gavel struck, but even that sound was drowned by the surge of human reaction. Abbott turned toward the audience, visibly rattled, muttering something about decorum. But Crockett wasn't finished. She opened a new document, transcripts of his own previous statements. "Here," she said, "last year you said Texas was a land of opportunity where anyone who works hard can succeed. Yet this bill limits voting access in majority-minority districts. So tell me, how does that definition of opportunity hold up when opportunity itself requires permission?" Abbott's lips parted, but no sound came. The cameras zoomed in. Sweat glistened just above his collar. Crockett paused, a beat of silence, so deliberate it felt choreographed by destiny. Then she spoke the line that would echo across millions of screens. "Governor," she said, voice calm and unyielding, "your argument doesn't defend Texas, it defends your comfort." The crowd inhaled as one. A wave of murmurs surged through the chamber. Someone whispered, "She said it." Abbott tried to respond, but the cadence was gone, the words hollow. That's an unfair characterization," he stammered. "I've spent my career serving." "Serving who?" Crockett asked, not with spite but with clarity. "Because public service without accountability is just self-service." That line landed like a final note in a symphony. The moderator didn't bother to restore order. The room had already chosen its victor. For a moment, Abbott looked at her the way a crumbling monument might look at the wrecking ball, disbelief, at being rendered obsolete. Crockett sat back, hands folded, gaze forward. She didn't smile at first. She just breathed steady, grounded whole. And then faintly the corners of her mouth lifted, not in triumph, but in peace. The murmurs turned to applause. Reporters whispered headlines before the words even reached their keyboards. Crockett destroys Abbott's argument in seconds. The calm that cracked the Capitol. Truth wins in Austin. One of Abbott's aides leaned over and whispered something into his ear. He shook his head, staring down at his notes, pages of talking points now rendered meaningless. Crockett closed her folder. Around her, the crowd rose not all at once, but in waves, as if moved by something larger than spectacle. A teacher in the back row wiped away tears. A veteran clapped quietly. Even a few of Abbott's usual supporters lowered their eyes, not out of shame, but out of recognition. This wasn't politics, it was revelation. And in that revelation, Jasmine Crockett became more than a representative. She became a mirror reflecting what real leadership looked like when stripped of ego. She looked back at Abbott one last time, her tone soft but unflinching. "Governor," she said, "you asked for this debate to defend Texas values. I'd say you just met one." The chamber erupted cheers, gasps, applause that felt like release. Abbott's mic clicked off. Crockett's remained lit, glowing like a beacon under the bright white lights. And as the noise swelled, she gathered her papers with quiet precision, stood, and exited the frame, leaving behind a silence louder than any soundbite. Within minutes, that moment would explode far beyond the room, and the internet would crown a new hero. It took less than 5 minutes for the clip to leave the chamber and detonate across the internet. The moment Jasmine Crockett dismantled Greg Abbott's argument became instant legend, a cultural thunderclap. Phones lit up like fireworks. Twitter feeds flooded with hashtags. Crockett crushed it, truth wins, Texas takedown. On TikTok, creators remixed her 15-second masterclass into slow-motion edits set to triumphant music. One viral caption read, "This is how you end arrogance with facts, not fury." Another simply said, "Queen behavior." Cable news anchors scrambled to reframe their coverage. Networks that had ignored her name just hours before suddenly treated it like a national event. A CNN panelist leaned forward, almost giddy. "You can mark this as the moment the narrative shifted. She didn't just out-argue him, she exposed the emptiness of his entire platform." Fox commentators tried to spin it, calling the exchange a political stunt. But even some conservative strategists admitted on air, Abbott walked right into it. In living rooms, coffee shops, and break rooms across America, the clip played on loop. The image of Abbott blinking, caught off guard, contrasted perfectly with Crockett's poised expression, an iconography of calm intelligence standing over crumbling bluster. A late-night host opened their monologue with a smirk. When Jasmine Crockett said, "Your argument defends your comfort," somewhere the truth checked itself into the trending tab. The audience roared. Memes flooded Reddit. Abbott edited into collapsing towers of Jenga blocks, Crockett portrayed as a truth sniper. But amid the laughter, there was admiration. Teachers used the clip in classrooms to discuss debate structure and the power of composure. Activists cited it as proof that you don't need rage to deliver revolution, just clarity. In Dallas, murals began to appear, bold colors, her silhouette under the quote that started it all. "Your argument doesn't defend Texas, it defends your comfort." The artwork wasn't just tribute, it was declaration. A reminder that words, when chosen with integrity, could shift power. Crockett, meanwhile, stayed silent that night. No victory tweet, no self-congratulation. Her team advised her to ride the wave, but she chose stillness. The next morning, she appeared on a morning show, crisp navy blazer, minimal makeup, steady voice. The host leaned forward. "Congresswoman Crockett, did you expect that moment to go viral?" She smiled, barely. "I expected accountability," she said. "If that's viral now, then maybe we're finally getting somewhere." Clips from that interview spread almost as fast as the confrontation itself. Commentators called it a masterclass in grace under fire. Young viewers reposted it with captions like, "She said it without saying it." In one trending TikTok, a mother filmed her teenage daughter watching the debate for the first time. The girl leaned forward, eyes wide, whispering, "That's how you do it." Thousands commented, "Representation matters." The ripples reached far beyond Texas. National columnists wrote essays about the Crockett effect, calling her approach a blueprint for moral clarity in politics. One wrote, "In a time when shouting feels like the only way to be heard, Crockett proved that silence, when chosen, can be louder." Even Abbott's allies began to fracture. Leaked emails revealed his staff debating how to contain the narrative. One aide wrote, "Every rebuttal makes her look stronger. Maybe we should just stop talking about it." But it was too late. The moment had transcended talking points. It had become myth. Crowds began quoting her words at rallies. Protest signs read, "Comfort isn't a policy." College students used the debate as a case study in rhetoric and power dynamics. Commentators compared her to past figures who changed discourse with poise rather than rage. Every reaction video, every share, every replay carried the same current of awe. People weren't just celebrating her, they were feeling seen through her. Immigrants, teachers, nurses, veterans, the quiet backbone of the country watched her stand her ground with dignity and thought. That's us. In a political landscape addicted to chaos, Crockett had done the impossible. She turned decency into drama. As days passed, Abbott's team avoided questions about the exchange. Reporters noted his uncharacteristic silence. Behind closed doors, donors grew nervous. "One moment shouldn't shake us," someone muttered, but it already had. Crockett's office, meanwhile, flooded with letters handwritten, emotional, raw. One from a grandmother in Laredo read, "I cried watching you. I've waited 50 years to see someone talk to power like that, not with anger, but with truth." And yet, through all the noise, Crockett remained grounded. No tour, no brand deals, no overexposure, just work. She returned to committee meetings quietly as if nothing had happened. But the world had changed around her. The clip had rewritten the power script, proof that one moment of clarity could pierce through 1,000 speeches of noise. Journalists speculated, was this the start of something bigger? A political strategist said it best on MSNBC. "Every once in a while, the system produces someone who reminds us what leadership sounds like." Crockett didn't just win a debate. She reminded people what truth feels like. And as the montage of reactions faded, the tweets, the laughter, the praise, the image that lingered was her calm smile in that final second before she spoke. The moment before truth dropped like thunder. But beneath the viral fame, a deeper message began to emerge, one that went beyond politics. In the days that followed, the noise faded, but the echo remained. The viral rush of the moment gave way to reflection, the kind that lingers after history taps you on the shoulder and whispers, "Remember this." People replayed the clip not for the takedown, but for the tone. Crockett hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't needed to. Her strength came from precision, from patience, from the kind of moral gravity that doesn't demand the room's attention, it earns it. Her calm composure became more than just political posture. It became philosophy. In an age where outrage had become entertainment, she reminded the world that truth doesn't need volume to be heard. It just needs conviction. Commentators began drawing lines backward through time, connecting her to a lineage of American figures who faced hostility with grace. Rosa Parks' silence on that bus. Obama's pause before the word hope. Shirley Kishone's smile when asked if she was being too ambitious. The through line was clear, dignity as defiance. Because what Crockett had done that day wasn't just expose one man's hypocrisy, she'd exposed a system's addiction to performance. Abbott's strength had always been in spectacle, but she dismantled him with simplicity. A sentence, a look, a stillness. And in that stillness, she proved something America forgets every election cycle. Composure is not submission, it's control. Her restraint became the mirror through which people saw themselves, the immigrant who swallows insults at work, the teacher who stays calm in chaos, the activist who refuses to shout because truth shouldn't have to compete with noise. For them, Crockett wasn't just a politician, she was validation, proof that integrity could still cut through the static. Even her critics struggled to spin it. They called her calculating, too polished, too composed. Yet those very words revealed what they feared: a woman who didn't break, who didn't rage on cue, who refused to let arrogance define the tempo of her truth. In interviews, Crockett deflected the hero narrative. "It's not about me," she said. "It's about reminding people that public service means service, not spectacle." But her humility only amplified the resonance. Her example became a quiet manifesto that grace could still be revolutionary. There was a shift in tone nationwide, subtle but real. On talk shows, pundits debated the Crockett effect. In classrooms, debate students analyzed her packing. In churches, pastors quoted her closing line, "Your argument doesn't defend Texas, It defends your comfort. It became sermon material, civic lesson, social rallying cry. Because deep down, everyone recognized the symbolism. This wasn't just Abbott versus Crockett. It was integrity versus manipulation, empathy vs ego, substance versus spin. It was America's eternal crossroads, played out in a 15-second exchange. And maybe that's why the moment hit so hard. Because it wasn't just about Texas. It was about all the times truth had been ignored for showmanship, justice delayed for convenience, humanity traded for headlines. Crockett's victory didn't come from dominance, it came from discipline. From the idea that justice isn't something you perform, it's something you practice. That the real revolution happens when calm dismantles chaos, when decency stands its ground without apology. Her words, played millions of times, carried a lesson older than politics itself. Dignity is not weakness, truth is not noise, justice always echoes louder. And as her story joined the tapestry of American moments that remind us who we are at our best, one truth crystallized, the kind of truth that doesn't fade with the next trend or headline. Because in the end, moments like this remind us the real power isn't in the argument, it's in the truth that survives it. The screen fades to black, then flashes back to the defining moment. Jasmine Crockett, steady as stone, looks across the chamber and delivers the line that broke the internet. Your argument doesn't defend Texas, it defends your comfort. The words echo once more, stripped of background noise, ringing clear as truth itself. The image freezes on her face, composed, fearless, utterly certain. Then the narrator's voice cuts through, measured and resolute. When arrogance meets integrity, history remembers who stayed standing. A montage rolls, citizens watching on phones, teachers replaying the clip in classrooms, families nodding quietly at dinner tables. The music swells, cinematic yet grounded, each beat carrying the pulse of something bigger than politics. Because this wasn't just a debate. It was a reminder that truth doesn't need permission, that dignity is strength, and that courage still lives in the quiet moments between chaos. The narrator's tone softens, inviting, intimate. If this moment moved you, if it reminded you that leadership can still look like grace, that truth can still sound like calm, then don't let it fade. Share it. Talk about it. Be part of the movement that believes decency is power. The screen fills with a final image. Crockett walking out of the chamber, head high, shoulders steady, light flooding the hallway behind her. Text fades in over the image. Justice, dignity, courage, these aren't old values, they're timeless ones. The music quiets to a heartbeat tempo, steady and sure. Because every time truth takes the microphone, the narrator says, the world gets a little louder with hope. Moment Jasmine Crockett shattered Greg Abbott's bill argument in seconds.